Hey everyone, it's TVI Tornado, and we're back to cover some more Pokemon Home Pokemon that have recently come out in Scarlet and Violet. If you missed part 1 where I covered Generation 1 and 2, then I'd suggest going over to that video, which I'll link in the description. Although, if you are only interested in the other generations, or if you've watched the previous video already, then stick around as we go over the next couple of Pokemon. Since Generation 3 and 4 only consist of legendary and mythical Pokemon, which I said I wasn't covering, we'll instead be going over Generation 5 and 6 to see how competitively viable each Pokemon are, or maybe some cool strategies that you can show off to your friends. So like part 1, let's go over some of these awesome new Pokemon, and let's see what ranking I give them from 1 to 10. So we have a 2-for-1 kicking off this video with Samurott and Hisuian Samurott. While Samurott has the edge of only being weak to electric and grass, Hisuian Samurott cuts in with its ability Sharpness, which pairs nicely with its signature move, which we'll get into momentarily. Samurott is a defensive special attacker that could take advantage of its attack, while Hisuian Samurott swaps its defenses to give it more speed, while becoming more of a physical attacker, but still making use of its special attack. Now Samurott isn't much of a special attacker, and this is a result of its limited access to special attacks, especially from coverage options, so you'd be much better off running a bulkier option with Shell Armor and setting up with Sword Stance or Focus Energy, and then going to town with this array of physical options, using moves such as Aqua Jet, Drill Run and Mega Horn. Or if you're running Sharpness, then all the slicing moves such as Aqua Cutter, Sacred Sword, X-Scissor and the signature move of Ceaseless Edge, all increase in power by 50%, with the drawback being that your defences are slightly lowered, and the additional Dark typing making you weak to Fairy, Fighting and Bug. So leading the leaderboard, both Samurott are going to get a 7.5 out of 10. With great bulk comes great setup ability, and would make for a great choice to switch into. And with Sharpness and Shell Armor, Samurott becomes a great candidate to Terastallize, since it would work amazingly both offensively and defensively. It's just annoying how its special attack and speed stats don't necessarily help this Pokemon out, since you can't really use many special attacks, and running it in Trick Room or Tailwind can be difficult depending on which opponent you go up against. And besides an immunity to Psychic, Dark doesn't really help Water. Legs 11 Lilligan not only brings its hustle ability, but also the fighting type, which somewhat helps it both offensively and defensively, depending on who you go up against. But if you didn't want this physical attacker running hustle, then you could always double its 105 speed with Chlorophyll. Either of its abilities are going to take advantage of that high attack or speed stat, but just be wary that with low defences and special defence, you're going to probably get one shot, especially to flying type moves. On the physical side, we see some nice stab moves in Close Combat and Seed Bomb, and there's even great coverage options in moves such as Acrobatics, Ice Spinner and Poison Jab. And while Victory Dance is going to be a fan favourite, you can't ignore the likes of Synthesis and After You, which in doubles, when paired with the past Paradox Pokemon, you can really take advantage of the high speed and sunlight. I'm going to give Hisuu and Lilligan an 8 out of 10. It's great in both singles and doubles. However, because of its many weaknesses, it has to rely on its partner Pokemon in doubles if it wants to really take full advantage of its movesets, especially considering many of its status moves can support itself and its partner. It could even go full out attack mode considering how powerful it is, and its great speed makes it very fast. But since Hustle makes your average accuracy 80%, and because Sunlight would need to be set up in order to activate Chlorophyll, even though it does have two great abilities, they do have a downside. Basculin gets a new White Stripe form, and I did want to mention how Rattled could lead you into some interesting strategies. And with access to these different moves, you could find a slot on your team if you wanted to run something gimmicky. I mean, you could give it an Eviolite if you were trying to set up Rattled. It definitely will be one of the more faster Eviolite users if you were to choose it on your team. 5 out of 10, long story short, just don't use this Pokemon. It's not the worst Eviolite user, but since its base stat total is far too low, and there are better water type options out there, you're better off picking any other water type, maybe even its evolution Basculegion. Hisuian Zoroark, where do I begin? Before we get into the analysis, can I just say that it has one of the best shinies ever, and it was so clever retaining its illusion ability, since before you were only immune to Psychic, but now you have 3 immunities to Fighting, Normal and Ghost to play around with, meaning you have more disguise options when leading this Pokemon into battle. When you send this Pokemon out, you have one of two options: set it up and hit hard on the physical side, or set it up and hit hard on the special side. Either way, you might want to invest in a Focus Sash, seeing how both its defences are really low. For your setup options, you have Agility, Nasty Plot and Sword Stance, but feel free to use Curse or Trick if you're running it with a Choice Scarf. These are the best physical moves it gets access to, pretty decent stab options, and the coverage isn't too bad either, and plenty of special options to take advantage of, especially when you want to match the moves of your teammates, seeing how you'll be coming out disguised as them. This Pokemon is well deserving of a 9 out of 10. If it weren't for Team Preview ruining the surprise, it would have definitely gone up to 9.5 or even 10. However, you can still throw your opponent off if they're not expecting Zoroark at any given moment, and the illusion ability paired with its 3 immunities just makes it one incredible lead, middle or endgame scenario. And if that weren't all, you can also throw your opponent off by making it either a physical attacker if they're expecting a special, or vice versa. Hisuian Braviary Braviary flies in next with the Psychic typing. And while it does lose Defiant, this special attacker gains the new ability of Tinted Lens. It takes advantage of Tinted Lens with its new 112 special attack, and its defences aren't too bad seeing how it has 110 HP. Some of the special moves that Hisuu and Braviary gets to take advantage of are Air Slash, Dazzling Gleam, Esper Wing, Heat Wave, Shadow Ball and Terror Blast. And bear in mind that if your opponent switches to take a not very effective hit, then your ability Tinted Lens will actually make it do neutral damage. That makes this Pokemon very hard to switch into, especially if it's already set up beforehand. The noticeable setup moves are Calm Mind and Tailwind. If you get set up fairly early, then Hisuu and Braviary is going to put in the work and get you at least a knockout or two. So overall, I'm going to give Hisuu and Braviary a 7.5 out of 10. It's nothing to write home about, but it's still pretty good if you wanted to use it on your team. Because of its wide range of moves and its ability Tinted Lens, it does make it difficult to switch into. But if you don't set yourself up first, which could be a struggle, then it means that the opponent could just get the edge over you in certain matches. So to summarise, set this thing up and just sweep from there. Just be aware that it has many weaknesses and its abilities aren't really that groundbreaking. Big Daddy Chestnut is here, but for several reasons this Pokemon is hit and miss. Its abilities aren't anything too special, and while Grass and Fighting is offensive, it's not the greatest when it comes to defense. And speaking of, its special defense is very low. And while you could argue that it makes up for it on the physical side, having many weaknesses, especially a quad weakness to flying, means that more often than not you're just going to have to rely on its physical offense. But you can't really do that either considering how slow it is. It does however get a plethora of incredible physical attacks. And I would have to agree with the event raids that Rock is probably its best terrestrialization option, seeing how Rock Slide and Stone Edge could do even more damage. Plus it will turn its weaknesses to fire, poison and flying into a resisted hit instead. And again, with its status moves it gets a plethora of those too. There are scenarios where Chestnut works really well in a team. Maybe a certain tournament theme with certain restrictions would allow this to actually shine. But for now I can only give it a 6.5 out of 10. As a grass fighting type with the ability to terrestrialize into a rock type, it does cover a lot of the metagame currently. However, because of how slow it is, it does struggle to get those attacks in, especially if the opponent can just one-shot it. And I mean, it doesn't even have a great ability to justify using it. Normally, if a Pokemon is average, then its ability can be used as a case study for you to have it on your team. But since Overgrow and Bulletproof are very situational, there will rarely be a game where these abilities come in use. Tall Mama Delphox is here, bringing a slightly better typing of Fire and Psychic to the board. But again, just like Chestnut, Fire and Psychic isn't really that good defensively, and the two abilities it gets access to don't necessarily help it out in battle at all. That just leaves it down to the stats whether it's useful or not. And in this case, it actually works in its favour. A fast special attacker that can hold its own when it's hit with a special attack. So let's see what kind of moves we're working with. Loads of stab options, especially in Overheat and Psychic. And if you want coverage, there's Dazzling Gleam, Grass Knot and even Shadow Ball. But if you want it to be a bit more tricky, then Delphox has you covered. Not only does it get damage reduction from Light Screen, Reflect, Will-O-Wisp and Charm, but you can also set up with Calm Mind or Nasty Plot. Or you could use Encore and Trick to really hinder your opponent's Pokemon. So I've ranked Delphox 7 out of 10. And this is mainly because it does slightly better than Chestnut. It's a great option if you're looking for a special attacker on your team, and if you're not using special attacks, then it can still hinder your opponents with its status moves. And while its stat distribution is brilliant, it does get outclassed by other Pokemon, especially other Fire or Psychic type options. They'll usually have better abilities that aren't as situational as Blaze or Magician, and in certain battles, it's better to just stay a pure Fire or Psychic type. My main man Gakuga has hopped his way into the hearts of many, and here's just a few reasons why. Not only does the Water Dark type offer some great coverage, but his hidden ability of Protean has broken the mould for competitive battling since 2013. And if that wasn't enough, then the Battle Bond ability that was introduced in Sun and Moon has given people the edge in certain battles. However, since Scarlet and Violet nerfed this ability, you might as well stick with Protean as the best option. Abilities aside, the stats have been a key component as to why players have chosen Greninja as a staple on their competitive teams, being one of the fastest Pokemon capable of hitting both on the physical or special side. Plus with the aforementioned Protean ability, then you've got yourself a textbook definition glass cannon sitting right in front of you. Bearing in mind that Protean will make all these physical attacks stab, Greninja gets access to Flying, Fighting, Poison, Ice, Water, Dark, Normal, Rock, Ghost, Grass and Bug type moves. While on the special side, you may not get as many type options, but you do get Extra Sensory for Psychic or Mud Shot for Ground. And then you do have Terror Blast if you wanted to have the missing types of Dragon, Fairy, Steel, Electric and Fire. With all those insane options, plus the fact that this is mainly a glass cannon, you might not even need status moves. But here they are anyway, and if I were to choose, I'd pick Haze in case the opponent sets up, or Spikes and Toxic Spikes if you wanted to set up some traps. So Greninja's gonna get the respectable 8 out of 10. But honestly, if the abilities won't change this generation, then I would have definitely put it higher. The only other thing holding it back besides its abilities is the fact that it's a glass cannon that can get KO'd quite easily. But that's just a small price to pay for being one of the fastest options to hit hard with its Protean ability, which is basically terrestrialization. Now Carbink's an interesting case, because even though its typing is great, and its base stats sit at 500, it should only really be used for setting up. It gets Stealth Rock and Trick Room, and you can also set up Reflect and Light Screen, but I can only give it a 5 out of 10 because it just doesn't do much. It's slow and it can't deal that much damage unless you're using something like Body Press, but even then you might as well just use one of its status moves. Because of its high defences, it does make it really bulky, and its ability Sturdy allows it to stick around for at least one hit. But if you're going to use one of your precious Pokemon slots on a Carbink, then I hope it's more for a gimmicky reason than an actual competitive reason. Hisuu and Gudra, a Dragon and Steel type, one of my favourite type combinations. This makes it weak to only fighting in ground, and it resists a whole bunch of moves. Not to mention some pretty decent abilities that can help it out in battle. Plus, being a pseudo legendary, you already know that the base stats are going to be crazy. I mean, you're already looking at 80 HP, 100 defense and 150 special defense. You're going to have a tough time taking this thing down, and while you're struggling to take this thing down, it's going to return the favour by hitting you with either a physical attack or a special attack. And since those are 100 and 110, you know it's going to be dealing quite a lot of damage. On the physical side, you're looking at some really powerful hits with Body Press, Earthquake, Ice Spinner, Outrage and Iron Head. But if you want to go on the special side, then you have some really powerful stab options with Draco Meteor and Steel Beam. Plus, if you wanted some elemental coverage, then you've got things like Flamethrower, Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, Sludge Bomb and Thunderbolt. But unfortunately, Hisui and Gudra doesn't have the greatest status move selection. You could set up a substitute maybe, but that's about it. Who saw this coming? A 9 out of 10 for Hisui and Gudra. It has a phenomenal typing that only makes it weak to fighting and ground, but you can easily avoid this by Trustalizing into a flying type. Its abilities are solid, and it has such incredible stats that it has so many different roles on a person's team. You can make it a physical attacker with Sap Sipper, or you can make it a special attacker with Gooey. Not to mention you can give it shell armor and make it a physical or special wall. Or you could make it a physical and special wall to really drag out the games. The downsides aren't even that bad. All I will say is at 60 speed, it makes it awkward to use in a Trick Room. And then last up we have Hisui and Avalugg. But is the rock typing and strong jaw an improvement or a detriment? Well yes, but actually no. The rock typing does help out with resisted hits against certain typings, which goes really well with a massive 184 defense. And with 127 attack, the Strong Jaws ability goes really well with this Pokemon. Crunch and Ice Fang get to benefit from this ability, but you could quite easily give this thing Body Press or Stone Edge if you wanted to do extra damage. But if you did want to lean into the physical wall side of things, then you have options with Aurora Veil, Iron Defense and Recover. So our final ranking is going to be a 7.5 out of 10. If you go up against physical opponents, then you shouldn't have an issue, but it's ridiculously vulnerable to special hits, and with so many weaknesses, it's mainly going to get knocked out. And since it's pretty slow, you're going to have to take a hit before you do one back. But if you can somehow keep this Pokemon in the back, then it makes for a brilliant Trustalization option for the endgame. So they were all the Generation 5 and 6 Pokemon ranked. I think I enjoyed these rankings more than the first video, but you'll have to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Just Generation 7, 8 and 9 now, so keep an eye out for that video in the future. Thank you for sticking around until the end, and thank you so much if you watched this video and the previous video. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We're slowly making our way to 100, so each subscriber counts. But until next time guys, I've been TVR Tornado. I'll be flying off to the next video, but until then, make sure to train hard and team build to the best of your abilities, and I'll see you guys next time.